Something is happening right now that most of the world is not ready for. Iran just drew a line in the sand, a hard, absolute, non-negotiable line, and the words came directly from the highest levels of the Islamic Republic. Iran's uranium will not leave Iranian soil, not 1 gram, not 1 centimeter, under any circumstances, under any deal, under any pressure. Those words were not a negotiating tactic, they were not political theater, they were a declaration. And the United States military responded in a way that sent a message louder than any speech ever could. What just happened between Iran and America is not a diplomatic misunderstanding. It is not another chapter in a long and tired political saga. What is unfolding right now is something fundamentally different, something more serious, more dangerous, and more consequential than anything we have seen in this conflict in years. But to understand what the US military just sent, you first need to understand what Iran actually said. Because those words, those specific words about uranium staying in Iran, carry a weight that goes far beyond nuclear policy. They are the sound of a door slamming shut. For decades, the world has operated on a fragile assumption that Iran could be negotiated with, that economic pressure, diplomatic frameworks, and international oversight could eventually bring Tehran to a table where a real agreement was possible. The 2015 nuclear deal, the JCPOA, was built on that assumption. It was imperfect. It was contested. But it existed because both sides believed, at least publicly, that a middle ground was possible. That assumption just took a serious hit. Iran's supreme leader and senior military commanders have now made their position explicit. Any deal that requires Iran to ship its enriched uranium outside the country is dead on arrival. They are not willing to discuss it. They are not willing to consider it as a temporary measure. They are not willing to accept it as part of a broader compromise. The uranium enriched on Iranian soil stays on Iranian soil. This matters enormously, because the entire architecture of any credible nuclear agreement depends on Iran not having immediate access to weapons-grade material. The whole point of shipping enriched uranium out of the country is to create time and distance between Iran and a nuclear weapon. Remove that condition, and the deal becomes, in the eyes of Washington, effectively meaningless. So what do you do when the diplomatic door closes? You remind the other side exactly what is sitting just outside that door. The United States military did not send a diplomatic cable. It did not issue a formal protest through the United Nations. It did not call an emergency meeting of the Security Council. Those moves belong to a different kind of conflict. What the Pentagon authorized was something far more visceral, far more visible, and far more intentional. Multiple B-2 Spirit stealth bombers were deployed to Diego Garcia, the remote but strategically critical U.S. military base in the Indian Ocean. Not one, not two. A significant deployment. The kind of deployment that does not happen quietly, the kind that is meant to be noticed. And everyone noticed. Now, if you know anything about military hardware, you know that the B-2 Spirit is not a standard aircraft. It is not a show of force in the traditional sense. It is not a fighter jet doing a flyover to signal displeasure. The B-2 is specifically designed for one purpose above all others: to penetrate the most sophisticated air defense systems in the world, to fly deep into heavily protected territory, and to deliver the most powerful conventional weapons in the American arsenal with surgical precision, including the massive Ordnance Penetrator, the GBU-57. A bomb so large, so dense, and so specifically engineered that it exists for essentially one mission profile: destroying deeply buried, heavily fortified underground facilities. Facilities built beneath mountains, beneath reinforced concrete, beneath layers of earth and rock, designed to survive anything short of a nuclear strike. Facilities exactly like the ones Iran has spent the last 2 decades building. Fordo, Natanz, Parchin. These are not ordinary buildings. Iran did not construct these sites near the surface where they would be vulnerable. They built them underground precisely because they understood that any future conflict would involve an air campaign targeting their nuclear infrastructure. They hardened these sites against exactly the kind of attack the United States might one day choose to launch. And for years, that hardening created a genuine military dilemma. Could American conventional weapons actually destroy those facilities? The honest answer was uncertain. Some assessments suggested that even the most powerful non-nuclear bombs could not guarantee complete destruction of the deepest Iranian sites. Iran knew this, American planners knew this, and Iran incorporated that knowledge into its strategic calculus. But what most people don't realize is that the calculus changed significantly. The massive Ordnance Penetrator was developed precisely to close that gap. The United States looked at the problem of deeply buried fortified nuclear facilities and decided that diplomatic uncertainty could not be the only answer. The GBU-57 weighs over 30,000 pounds. It carries an enormous explosive payload. It is designed to penetrate meters and meters of hardened concrete and reinforced earth before detonating. Multiple strikes in the same location can punch progressively deeper, collapsing even the most fortified underground chambers. When B-2 bombers capable of carrying this weapon appear at Diego Garcia, within striking range of Iran, the message is not subtle. It is not meant to be subtle. But what happened next made the situation even more serious. Simultaneously, the USS Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group repositioned in the region. The Carrier Strike Group is not just an aircraft carrier. It is a mobile military city. Destroyers, cruisers, submarines, and dozens of strike aircraft, all operating together as a unified offensive and defensive platform. Its presence in regional waters extends American air power across an enormous geographic range. 2 vectors: air power from Diego Garcia, naval air power from the Carrier Group, both within operational range, both capable of sustained operations, both positioned in a way that could not be explained as routine rotation. Iran's military commanders read these deployments the way they were intended to be read. And here's where the story takes a deeply serious turn, because Iran did not back down. Publicly, Iranian officials described the B-2 deployments as psychological warfare, as American intimidation that would not alter Iran's fundamental position. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps issued statements reinforcing the Uranium Declaration. Senior commanders gave speeches. State media framed the entire situation as American desperation in the face of Iranian resolve. But behind closed doors, the picture was more complicated. Intelligence assessments from multiple regional sources indicated significant internal debate within Iran's senior leadership. Not about the public position. The public position was locked, but about the actual risk. About whether the United States, under its current leadership, had made a genuine decision to act if negotiations collapsed completely. This is the question that matters above all others. Is this a bluff? Throughout the long history of American-Iranian tension, the answer had generally been yes. Display of force was followed by more diplomacy. Deployments were followed by back-channel conversations. The military hardware appeared, delivered its message, and was eventually repositioned. Iran had learned to read the rhythm of American signaling, and the rhythm had almost always ended in talking rather than striking. But this moment felt different to people watching from inside the region. And the reason it felt different came down to one specific factor: the uranium enrichment levels. Iran is not enriching uranium at the modest levels permitted under the original 2015 deal. It is enriching at 60%. It has demonstrated the technical capability to reach 90%, which is weapons grade, in a very short period of time. Months, possibly weeks, under certain acceleration scenarios. The gap between where Iran is now and where it would need to be to produce enough fissile material for a nuclear weapon has compressed to a historically narrow margin. This is the number that changes everything. Not the rhetoric, not the deployments, not the diplomatic statements, the enrichment level. Because once a country crosses certain thresholds in nuclear development, military options that were previously available begin to close. Destroying a facility is one thing. Destroying a program that has already produced enough material, dispersed and concealed across multiple locations, is an entirely different problem. The window for a military option, if one was ever seriously contemplated, does not stay open indefinitely. And American military planners understand this with complete clarity. What most people watching from the outside miss is the internal timeline pressure that shapes American decision-making in this scenario. Political windows open and close. Military positioning cannot be maintained indefinitely without either being used or withdrawn. Every week that passes is a week Iran uses to advance its program further, disperse materials more widely, and harden its sights more deeply. The B-2s at Diego Garcia were not just a message to Iran. They were also a signal to allies in the region, to Israel, to Saudi Arabia, to the Gulf states, that the United States had not walked away from its military options, that the conversations happening in diplomatic back channels were not the only conversations happening. Israel had its own calculations running in parallel. For Israel, the red line on Iranian nuclear development has always been drawn at a different point than American red lines. Israeli military and intelligence doctrine has consistently held that a nuclear-capable Iran, even one that never actually tests a weapon, represents an existential strategic threat. Israeli officials have made this point publicly and privately for years, and Israel has demonstrated repeatedly its willingness to act unilaterally against nuclear proliferation threats when it believes the window is closing. The question of Israeli independent action adds an entirely separate layer of complexity to the American strategic calculation. A unilateral Israeli strike on Iranian nuclear facilities would almost certainly trigger an Iranian response. That response would almost certainly draw in American forces and interests across the region. The logic of events would not allow the United States to stand aside. So the American military positioning was not just about deterring Iran, it was also about managing the Israeli calculation. Demonstrating that American options remained on the table was, in part, an effort to prevent Israel from concluding it needed to act alone before the window closed entirely. 3 actors, Three separate but deeply intertwined calculations, one extremely dangerous geography. And then the back-channel conversations began to shift. Omani intermediaries, who had historically served as a quiet conduit between Washington and Tehran, reported renewed contact at senior levels. Not public diplomacy, not formal negotiations, but the kind of careful, deniable, exploratory communication that sometimes precedes a real breakthrough, and sometimes precedes a complete breakdown. What was being discussed in those conversations has not been fully disclosed, but the outline emerged from multiple sources in regional capitals. The American position had hardened around a specific demand, a verified reduction in enrichment levels combined with an intrusive monitoring regime in exchange for meaningful sanctions relief. The Iranian position remained anchored to the uranium stays in Iran declaration. The gap between those two positions was wide. But gaps have closed before. However, this is where things take a turn that most analysts did not predict. A series of incidents began occurring in and around Iranian territory that neither side officially acknowledged. Unexplained technical failures at Iranian enrichment facilities. Disruptions that Iranian engineers attributed to sabotage. Infrastructure connected to the nuclear program, experiencing problems that delayed operations and forced reassessments of timelines. Iran publicly blamed foreign adversaries. It blamed Israel. It blamed American intelligence. The accusations were delivered with the controlled fury of an organization that knew it was being targeted but could not prove it definitively in international forums. These incidents did something important to the internal Iranian debate. They demonstrated vulnerability. The hardened facilities, the underground chambers, the dispersed infrastructure, none of it had made the program invulnerable. The message from these incidents was the same message written across the deployment of B-2s at Diego Garcia, just delivered through a different channel. You are not as protected as you believe. The Mullahs' response was to double down publicly while quietly reassessing privately. This is a pattern that has characterized Iranian strategic behavior for decades. The public face is defiance. The private face is calculation. Iran has survived as a revolutionary state in a hostile regional and international environment precisely because its leadership, whatever its ideological commitments, has generally understood the difference between principled resistance and suicidal miscalculation. The question that hung over every closed-door meeting in Tehran, in Washington, in Tel Aviv, and in Riyadh was which category the current moment fell into. Was Iran's uranium declaration principled resistance, a negotiating position designed to extract maximum concessions while ultimately finding a compromise? Or was it genuine strategic commitment, a line that the Islamic Republic had decided to hold regardless of consequences? The answer to that question would determine whether the B-2s at Diego Garcia remained a message or became a mission. And the world was watching. Because the stakes were not limited to Iran and the United States. A military conflict of the scale implied by these deployments would send shockwaves through global energy markets. The Strait of Hormuz, through which a significant percentage of the world's oil supply passes, sits directly in the middle of any Iranian military response scenario. Disruption of that choke point would trigger economic consequences, felt from Asia to Europe to the Americas within days. Iran understood this. It was, in some ways, Iran's most significant deterrent. Not its air defenses, not its missile arsenal, not its network of regional proxies. The oil choke point, the ability to threaten global economic stability in ways that would make even American allies reconsider the cost of military action. But the massive Ordnance Penetrator changes the strategic calculation because a sufficiently rapid and devastating conventional strike could, in theory, degrade Iran's retaliatory capacity before it could be fully activated. The nightmare scenario for Iranian planners? The dream scenario for certain American ones. A strike so precise and so overwhelming that the window for Iranian response was compressed to near zero. Whether that scenario was genuinely on the table, or whether it existed primarily as a deterrent in itself, no one outside a very small circle of decision-makers knew with certainty. That uncertainty was itself a weapon. Where does this leave the world right now? Iran's declaration stands. The uranium will not leave Iranian soil. That is the public position, and it has not moved. The B-2s remain at Diego Garcia. The carrier group remains positioned. The back-channel conversations continue in the quiet spaces between the public confrontations. Something is building. The machinery of both diplomacy and military planning is running simultaneously, each feeding information and pressure into the other. The outcome is not written. It has not been decided. The space between a new agreement and a new conflict remains genuinely open. But the space is narrowing. Every day that passes, every centrifuge that spins, every statement from Tehran that reinforces the uranium declaration, and every American deployment that signals military readiness brings the moment of decision closer. The Mullahs said the uranium stays. The United States military sent B-2 bombers capable of destroying the facilities where that uranium sits. Both sides are now locked into positions that are difficult to retreat from without appearing to blink. History has seen moments like this before. Sometimes they end with a last-minute breakthrough that neither side fully expected. Sometimes they end differently. What happens in the coming weeks will not just determine the future of the Iranian nuclear program. It will determine whether the most dangerous standoff of this decade ends with a phone call or with something the world is not ready to see. The next move has not been made yet, but it is coming.